A crew on a fiber build once lost 9 days. 9 days, dead stopped, waiting on a piece of equipment. The project delivered on its original date. Nobody outside the site team ever knew. On the same program, a different task slipped by 4 days. 4 days. That one pushed the customer go-live back by a month, triggered a penalty conversation, and put the delivery manager in front of a steering committee explaining himself. Same project, same program. One delay was less than half the size of the other, and it did 15 times the damage. If you cannot look at your own schedule right now and tell me which of your tasks behaves like the 9-day slip and which behaves like the 4-day slip, then you do not have a schedule. You have a list of dates in a nice color. The difference between those two tasks is not luck, and it is not seniority, and it is not how hard anyone was pushing. It is arithmetic. It is knowable in advance. It has a name, and by the end of the next hour, you will be able to calculate it by hand, on paper, without software, for any project you are ever handed. Let's get into it. Welcome to Episode 11 of the Project Management Masterclass. I'm Jane Asimuo, co-founder of Sanugo Services, an IT consulting company based here in Canada. This is the scheduling episode, and I want to set your expectations properly because this one is long and it is deliberately technical. We are going to cover dependencies and the 4 dependency types, leads and lags, 3-point estimating, the critical path, and we will calculate one together, forward and backward, activity by activity. Total float, free float, and negative float, near critical paths, crashing and fast-tracking with real cost numbers, resource leveling and smoothing, baselines, schedule variance, and the schedule performance index, schedule risk analysis, and how to read a critical path inside Microsoft Project and Primavera P6. We will work through all of it on one single project network, so you can watch the same 9 activities change under every technique, and we will look at how scheduling actually behaves in 3 very different worlds: telecommunications, corporate training delivery, and oil and gas. Get a pen. I am serious about that. Let's begin. Let's start with where a schedule comes from, because most bad schedules are bad long before anyone opens the software. A schedule is not a list of dates. It is a model of how work actually flows, and like any model, it is only as good as the logic inside it. If the logic is wrong, the dates it produces are wrong, and they will be confidently, precisely, professionally wrong. That is what makes a bad schedule dangerous. Nobody argues with a Gantt chart. 4 inputs in this order. First, the work itself. You should already have a work breakdown structure, giving you deliverables broken into work packages. If you do not have that, stop and go build it, because scheduling work you have not defined is guesswork with extra steps. Second, activities. Take each work package and ask what is required to produce it. A work package called street cabinet installed becomes pour the pad, set the cabinet, terminate the fiber, energize, test. Third, duration. Not how long you would like it to take, how long it takes. And fourth, the one people rush, sequence. What has to happen before what? This is where projects are won and lost, and I want to be direct about why. Estimating errors tend to be small and they tend to cancel out. Some tasks run long, some run short. Logic errors do not cancel out. A missing dependency does not average away. It sits in your schedule quietly until the day it detonates, and then it costs you weeks. When a project is badly late, the root cause is far more often a sequencing problem than an estimating problem. Somebody did not know the permit had to be in before the crew mobilized. Somebody did not know the training environment had to exist before the pilot cohort could run. Nobody asked. It was not on the plan. So spend your time on the logic. The durations will be roughly right. The logic is where the money is. So, dependencies. There are 4 types. You will use one of them most of the time, but the other 3 are where clever scheduling lives. Type 1. Finish to start. The successor cannot start until the predecessor finishes. You cannot pull fiber through a conduit that has not been bored. This is the default in every tool on Earth, and it is usually right. If you model everything as finish to start, you will get a valid schedule. It will just be longer than necessary. Type 2. Start to start. The successor cannot start until the predecessor has started. Started, not finished. Once trenching begins, quality inspection can begin alongside it. Inspection cannot lead the trenching, but it does not wait for all of it either. This is how you model work that genuinely runs in parallel but still has a natural order. Type 3. Finish to finish. The successor cannot finish until the predecessor finishes. As-built documentation cannot be signed off until construction is signed off. Training material cannot be finalized until the system it documents is frozen. The two run alongside each other, and the constraint is on the finish. This one is underused, and it is very often the honest way to model documentation, testing, and quality work. Type 4. Start to finish. The successor cannot finish until the predecessor starts. Rare, confusing, and most project managers never model one deliberately. The cleanest real example I know: your legacy copper service cannot be decommissioned until the new fiber service starts carrying live traffic. The old thing cannot end until the new thing begins. You see it in system cutovers and shift handovers. Now a second classification which matters more for how you manage than how you draw. Every dependency also belongs to one of 4 categories. Mandatory dependencies are hard logic: physics, chemistry, contract, regulation. You cannot splice fiber that has not been pulled. You cannot enter a pressure vessel that has not been isolated and certified gas-free. Not negotiable. Discretionary dependencies are preferences. Your team completes all design before starting any permitting, because that is how they have always done it. That is a habit, not a law. Write this down. Discretionary dependencies are the best place to look when someone asks you to shorten the schedule, because they can be broken for free. We are going to prove that with real numbers later, and the result surprises people. External dependencies sit outside your organization: the municipality issuing the road cut permit, the utility approving pole attachments, the regulator accepting your dossier. You do not control these. You can only influence them, and everyone belongs on your risk register the moment it appears on your schedule. And internal dependencies are the ones your own organization controls, which means they are the ones you have no excuse for. When a project is late, ask which category caused it. Teams reach for the external explanation every time, because it is the one that is not their fault. The real culprit is very often a discretionary dependency nobody thought to question. 2 more pieces of vocabulary, and these 2 are where most scheduled dishonesty hides. Lag and lead. A lag is waiting time built into a relationship. You pour a concrete pad for a street cabinet, then you wait 7 days for it to cure before you set the cabinet on it. That is a 7-day lag on a finish-to-start relationship. Nobody is working. No resource is consumed. No cost is incurred. But 7 days of calendar disappear. Concrete curing, regulatory notice periods, a mandatory soak test after a cutover, the 2 weeks a client contractually has to review a document, all lags. Here is the discipline that matters. A lag must represent a real, external, physical, or contractual waiting period. That is all it is for. What a lag must never be is padding, and this is extremely common. A scheduler is nervous about an activity, so rather than argue about the duration, they quietly drop a 5-day lag in front of it. Now the schedule looks longer and nobody can see why. The lag is invisible in most default views. It is not attached to any activity, so it never appears in a duration report, and nobody can challenge it because nobody can find it. If you need contingency, put it in the open as a buffer activity with a name, or hold it as schedule reserve at the program level. A schedule you cannot audit is a schedule nobody should trust. A lead is the opposite. It is deliberate overlap. You let a successor start before its predecessor has fully finished. You begin splicing the first completed segments while boring continues further down the street. In the software, that is written as a negative lag minus 10 days, and it means those 2 activities now run on top of each other for 10 days. Leads are how experienced schedulers recover time. They are also how experienced schedulers create rework. Every lead is a bet that the predecessor will not change in the overlapping window. If the design on segment 3 changes after you have already spliced segment 3, you pay for that twice. So use leads consciously, know what you are betting, and never apply one to work that is still likely to change. Before we build the network, we need durations. And I want to challenge how you produce them, because the single number estimate causes an enormous amount of pain. When you ask an engineer how long something takes and they say 6 weeks, what have they told you? Almost never their honest average. Usually one of two things: the time it takes if nothing goes wrong, which is optimism, or a number with a quiet safety margin baked in that they will never admit to, which is padding. Either way, you have one number and no information about its shape. 3-point estimating fixes this. Instead of one number, you ask for 3. The optimistic case, where everything goes right. The most likely case, a normal run with normal friction, and the pessimistic case, where it goes badly, but plausibly, not an earthquake, just a bad, realistic run. The reason this works has nothing to do with mathematics. It works because it gives people permission to tell you the truth. Asking for a single number forces them to hide their uncertainty inside it. Asking for a range lets them show it to you. An activity estimated at 5, 6, 7 days is well understood. An activity estimated at 5, 6, 30 days is not an estimating problem. It is a risk, and it is telling you nobody actually knows. Then you combine them. The PERT, or beta, weighting is optimistic, plus 4 times most likely, plus pessimistic, all divided by 6. That trusts the most likely value more heavily while still letting the tails pull the answer. Let's do a real one. On our fiber project, the pole attachment agreement with the utility. Optimistic, 40 days, if the utility is responsive and our application is clean. Most likely 60 days. Pessimistic, 110 days, because make-ready engineering comes back requiring pole replacements and we join a queue. PERT gives us 40 plus 4 times 60, which is 240, plus 110. That is 390 divided by 6. 65 days. Look at what just happened. The team's most likely answer was 60. The expected duration is 65. 5 extra days appeared, they are real, and they came purely from the fact that this activity's downside sits much further away than its upside. That asymmetry exists in almost every activity on a real project, and a single-point estimate is completely blind to it. One more number. The standard deviation is roughly pessimistic, minus optimistic over 6. 110 minus 40, over 6, is about 11.5 days. Hold on to that, because when we get to schedule risk, it is going to matter enormously. Now the main event, the critical path. Here is the definition, and it sounds like a contradiction the first time you hear it. The critical path is the longest sequence of dependent activities through your project, and it determines the shortest possible time in which the project can be completed. The longest chain sets the shortest duration. Read it twice. Why is that true? Because every activity in that chain has to happen, and each one has to wait for the one before it. So the chain cannot be compressed by working harder somewhere else. Its length is the floor, which gives us the single most practical fact in scheduling. Any activity on the critical path that slips the whole project. 1 day for 1 day. There is nothing to absorb it. And the mirror image, which is just as important and far less understood, any activity that is not on the critical path can slip by some calculable amount and cost you absolutely nothing. That is our 9-day delay and our 4-day delay from the opening. The crew that lost 9 days was not on the critical path. It had slack. The system absorbed the hit and the date held. The task that lost 4 days was on the critical path and had nothing. 1 for 1, straight onto the end date. Now, some vocabulary discipline because this word gets abused daily. Critical in scheduling does not mean important. It does not mean difficult, expensive, risky, or high profile. The most important activity on your project, the one the whole business case depends on, may sit comfortably off the critical path with 3 weeks of slack. Critical is a purely structural property. It means 0 slack, nothing more. And it is not fixed. The critical path moves. As actual durations come in, a chain that had slack can consume it and become critical. So the critical path is not something you find once at the start and print out. It is something you recalculate every time you update the schedule, and if you are not recalculating it, you are managing last month's project. So how do you find it? 2 passes through the network. A forward pass to find the earliest anything can happen, and a backward pass to find the latest anything can happen without moving the end date. Then you compare the two. Where there is no gap between earliest and latest, you are on the critical path. Let's actually do it. Here is our project, a fiber to the premises build in a single zone. 9 activities. I have deliberately kept it to 9 so we can hold the whole thing in our heads, and I have rounded the durations for teaching. This is a composite example built to demonstrate the method, not a report on any one client engagement. Activity A, route survey and high-level design. 10 days. Nothing comes before it. Activity B, detailed engineering. 15 days. It needs A, finished. Activity C, road cut permit application and approval. 40 days. It needs B. Activity D, pole attachment agreement with the utility. 60 days. It also needs B. Activity E, boring and conduit, the underground route. 45 days. It needs the road cut permit. C. Activity F, aerial strand and lash, the overhead route. 30 days. It needs the pole agreement. D. Activity G, fiber pulling. 20 days. And this is the important one. It needs both E and F. Both routes have to be physically ready before we pull. Activity H, splicing and testing. 25 days. Needs G. Activity I, customer activation and handover. 15 days. Needs H. So the shape is a diamond. It splits in 2 after detailed engineering, runs down 2 parallel legs, 1 underground and 1 aerial, and the 2 legs merge back together at fiber pulling. Now, the forward pass. We walk from start to end and we ask, for each activity, the earliest it can possibly start, and therefore the earliest it can possibly finish. 2 rules only. Earliest finish equals earliest start plus duration, and earliest start equals the latest of all the earliest finishes of everything that must come before it. That second rule is the whole game at merge points. I am counting in elapsed days, starting the project at day 0, so the numbers stay clean. Activity A, nothing before it, so earliest start day 0, 10 days. Earliest finish, day 10. Activity B, needs A, which finishes day 10. Earliest start day 10. 15 days. Earliest finish, day 25. Activity C, the road cut permit. Needs B, done at 25. Earliest start 25, 40 days. Earliest finish day 65. Activity D, the pole agreement, also needs B. Earliest start 25, 60 days. Earliest finish day 85. Now the legs. Activity E, boring, needs C, done at 65. Earliest start 65, 45 days. Earliest finish day 110. Activity F, aerial, needs D, done at 85. Earliest start 85, 30 days. Earliest finish day 115. And here is the merge. Activity G, fiber pulling, needs both E and F. E is ready at day 110. F is ready at day 115. Which one governs? The later one. Always the later one. You cannot pull fiber when only half your route is built, so G's earliest start is day 115, not 110. The underground leg finished 5 days early and then sat there waiting. Feel that. Those 5 days are the most important number on this project so far, and we will name them shortly. G runs 20 days from 115. Earliest finish, day 135. Activity H, splicing and testing, starts 135, 25 days, finishes day 160. Activity I, activation and handover, starts 160, 15 days, finishes day 175. There it is. 175 days. That is the earliest this project can possibly complete, and notice we did not decide that. We did not negotiate it. It fell out of the logic. If somebody wants this project delivered in 140 days, the schedule has already told us that is not a target. It is a fiction, unless we change the logic or the durations. and we are going to do exactly that later. Now the backward pass, same network, opposite direction, different question. Not how early can this happen, but how late can this happen without pushing the finish date. We start at the end and anchor it. The project finishes day 175, so the latest finish for our final activity is day 175. Two rules again mirrored. Latest start equals latest finish minus duration. And latest finish equals the earliest of all the latest starts of everything that comes after it. Earliest this time, not latest. That is the trap. Going backwards, the tightest successor governs. Activity I, activation. Latest finish 175, 15 days, so latest start day 160. Activity H, splicing. The only thing after it is I, which must start by 160. So H's latest finish is 160, 25 days back. Latest start, day 135. Activity G, pulling, followed by H, which must start by 135, 20 days back. Latest start, day 115. Now the network splits again as we go back into our two legs. Activity F, aerial, followed by G, which must start by 115. So F's latest finish is 115, 30 days. Latest start, day 85. Activity E, boring, also followed by G, so E's latest finish is also 115, 45 days back. Latest start, day 70. Stop there and compare. E's earliest start was day 65. Its latest start is day 70. That gap is real. Boring can begin as late as day 70, and this project still lands on time. Activity D, the pole agreement, followed by F, which must start by 85, 60 days back. Latest start day, 25. Earliest start was also 25, no gap. Activity C, the permit, followed by E, which must start by day 70. So C's latest finish is day 70, 40 days back. Latest start day 30, but C's earliest start was day 25. There is our gap again, 5 days. Activity B, detailed engineering. It is followed by both C and D. C must start by day 30. D must start by day 25. Which governs? The earliest of them, day 25, because D is the demanding one. So B's latest finish is 25, 15 days back. Latest start day 10, same as its earliest start. No gap. Activity A, followed by B, which must start by day 10. Latest start day 0, no gap. Both passes are done. Now the payoff, and it is one subtraction. For every activity, latest start minus earliest start. A, 0 minus 0, 0. B, 10 minus 10, 0. C, 30 minus 25, 5. D, 25 minus 25, 0. E, 70 minus 65, 5. F, 85 minus 85, 0. G, H, and I, all 0. Every activity with 0 is on the critical path. So our critical path is A, B, D, F, G, H, I. Route survey, detailed engineering, pole attachment agreement, aerial construction, pulling, splicing, activation. 175 days, and you can add those 7 durations up yourself to confirm it. The permit and the boring each have 5 days of slack. Now look at what that tells you as a manager, because this is the entire point of doing the arithmetic. The critical path runs straight through the pole attachment agreement, 60 days, and it is the single activity over which you have the least control because it sits inside somebody else's organization. Your instinct is to go and push the boring crew because they are visible, they are yours, and pushing them feels like managing. The arithmetic says pushing the boring crew is worth nothing. The project's fate is sitting in a utility company's inbox. That is a completely different management strategy, and you cannot arrive at it by looking at a Gantt chart and worrying about whichever bar looks longest. Let's talk about float properly, because it is the most useful number in scheduling and the most abused. What we just calculated is total float, the amount of time an activity can slip without delaying the project completion date. Latest start minus earliest start, or equivalently latest finish minus earliest finish. Both give the same answer, and if they do not, you have made an arithmetic error. But there is a second kind, and the difference causes real confusion in real status meetings. Free float is the amount of time an activity can slip without delaying its immediate successor, not the project, the very next thing. These are different numbers, and our network demonstrates it beautifully. Activity E, boring, total float 5 days. Its successor is G, fiber pulling, which cannot start until day 115 anyway, because it is also waiting on the aerial leg. E finishes earliest at day 110, so E can slip 5 days and G's start does not move at all. Total 5, free 5. If boring runs 5 days late, genuinely nothing happens anywhere. Now activity C, the permit, total float, also 5 days. But its successor is E, boring, which starts as early as day 65 and C finishes as early as day 65. No gap between them at all, so C's free float is 0. Sit with that. 5 days of total float and 0 free float. What does that mean in practice? If the permit comes back 3 days late, the project end date is fine. We still deliver on day 175, but the boring crew's start date moves 3 days to the right. Immediately. And that crew is a mobilized subcontractor with equipment on a schedule and other jobs booked. So here is a conversation that happens on real projects, and now you can win it. The permit slips 3 days. You report to the steering committee that the end date is unaffected, which is true. And the construction manager says his crew has been pushed and he is charging you standby. Also true. Both statements are correct, because total float and free float are different numbers. Total float protected the customer. Free float, of which there was none, did not protect the subcontractor. If you only track total float, you get blindsided by cost impacts on activities you had classified as safe. Now 3 principles for using float. Principle 1. Float belongs to the project, not to the team holding it. If the boring crew has 5 days of float, that is not 5 days of permission to relax. It is protection the whole project owns against a bad week. The moment a team treats its float as personal comfort, they consume it early on something trivial, and it is not there in month 5 when you desperately need it. Float is a shared asset. Say that out loud to your teams. Principle 2. Float does not renew. Every day you consume is gone. A chain with 5 days of float that burns 3 in week 2 now has 2 days for the remaining 5 months. So track float as a trend, not a status. If float on a chain is declining week over week, that chain is deteriorating even if every activity on it reports green. Far more projects are surprised by float erosion than by an activity turning red. Principle 3, and this one is an alarm, not a metric. Negative float. If your software reports negative float, it is telling you something serious. You have imposed a date the logic cannot support. Somebody typed a deadline in, the arithmetic ran against it, and came back saying, this is already impossible. Minus 10 days of float does not mean tight. It means you are 10 days late on a project that has not started yet. Do not report that as amber, and above all, do not remove the constraint so the negative float disappears from the report. That deletes the warning. It does not fix anything. Negative float is the schedule doing its job. It is the one moment the model speaks up and tells you the truth before the truth costs you money. Which brings me to something that is not in most textbooks and costs real projects, real money. Near critical paths. Go back to our network. The critical path has 0 float. The other leg, the permit and the boring, has 5 days. So on your status report, the aerial leg is critical and gets attention, and the underground leg gets classified as fine. 5 days. On a chain containing a 40-day municipal permit and 45 days of boring through unknown ground, 5 days is nothing. 1 rock seam, 1 week of frozen ground, 1 revision cycle on the permit, and that chain has consumed its float and become your new critical path. And here is the part that hurts. Nobody was watching it because it was labeled non-critical for the first 4 months. This is how projects get blindsided, not by the critical path, which everybody is staring at, but by the chain that was almost critical and nobody was tracking. The critical path is the risk you have already priced in. The near-critical path is the one that arrives without warning. So set a float threshold. Pick a number that is meaningful relative to your project's length and volatility, and treat everything under it with critical path discipline. On a 6-month build like this one, I would set that threshold at around 10 working days, which puts our underground leg inside it, watched every week from day 1. Both major tools support this, and almost nobody switches it on. In Microsoft Project, you can change what counts as critical from 0 slack to any threshold you like. In Primavera P6, you can set the float path threshold and display multiple float paths at once, ranked. Turn it on. It takes 30 seconds and it changes what your team looks at. One last thing. When several paths of nearly equal length run in parallel, your schedule is fragile in a way a single number cannot express. 4 parallel chains, each with 3 days of float, is far more dangerous than one chain with 3 days of float, because you now have 4 independent chances to be late, and only one has to fire. That effect is called merge bias, and we will quantify it when we get to schedule risk. Let's stay in telecommunications a moment, because network builds are the cleanest scheduling classroom you will ever get. The defining feature of telecom delivery is that a large fraction of your critical path sits inside organizations you do not control. Look at our network. The single longest activity, 60 days, the one the whole date hangs on, is a pole attachment agreement. You do not manage that work. You cannot expedite it with overtime. You cannot add a crew to it. Your entire influence over the most important item on your schedule is the quality of your application and the strength of your relationship with the person processing it. That has hard consequences for how you plan. First, submit external applications as early as your information allows. Not as early as your process allows. Those are different dates, and the gap between them is usually pure waste. We attack exactly that gap shortly. Second, every external dependency goes on the risk register the day it enters the schedule, with a named owner whose actual job is that relationship, not a group, a person. Third, make ready engineering. When you apply to attach to somebody else's poles, the owner surveys them and often comes back saying these 11 poles need replacing first, and that work sits in their queue, on their timetable. Make ready is the most common cause of major overrun in aerial builds, and it frequently does not appear on the first draft of the schedule at all, because it is not your work, so nobody thinks to add an activity for it. Fourth, telecom builds are geographically parallel. You are doing the same 6 things in 40 zones, each with its own permits and ground conditions. That gives you many parallel chains of nearly identical length, which is exactly the merge bias problem I flagged. When 40 zones must all finish for the region to complete, the probability that all 40 land on time is far lower than the probability of anyone landing on time. Regional programs are late for that reason far more often than because any individual zone was badly run. And fifth, permits expire. If you obtain a road cut permit too early and construction then slips, the permit can lapse before you use it, and you reapply and re-queue. So earliest is not automatically best for every activity. Some activities you want to start as late as safely possible, which is precisely what a latest start date is for. The backward pass is not academic here. It is operationally useful. So the sponsor looks at your 175 days and says, we need it in 155. What do you actually do? There are 2 legitimate compression techniques, one enormously underrated technique most people skip entirely, and one thing people do constantly that is not a technique at all. We will take them in the order you should try them, which is not the order the textbooks list them. Start with the thing nobody starts with. Interrogate your logic. Remember discretionary dependencies? On our network, both the road cut permit and the pole attachment agreement wait on activity B, detailed engineering, 15 days of it. Ask the honest question. Does a pole attachment application actually require completed detailed engineering? No. It requires pole locations and loading data, which come out of the high-level route design, activity A. Somebody sequenced it after detailed engineering because that is the tidy order, not because it was required. So break it. Let the pole application start after A instead of after B. Recalculate. The pole agreement now starts day 10 instead of day 25. Aerial construction pulls forward. Project duration drops from 175 to 170 days. 5 days for free. And the critical path just moved to the underground leg because the aerial leg is no longer the longest chain. Now do the same to the road cut permit. Does that application need complete detailed engineering, or does it need the route alignment, which again comes from A? For most municipalities, the alignment. Recalculate again. 160 days, 15 days removed. Cost, $0. No extra crews, no overtime, no compressed durations, no additional risk beyond the modest chance of a resubmission. We did not work faster. We stopped waiting for something we never needed to wait for. That is why discretionary dependencies are where the money is. 15 days for the price of one honest conversation with the engineering lead. Now, crashing. Crashing means spending money to shorten the duration of an activity on the critical path. More crews, longer shifts, weekend work, a second machine. 2 rules, and violating either is expensive. Rule 1, only ever crash the critical path. Adding resources to an activity that has float buys you literally nothing and costs full price. That happens because the activity with float is where the contractor had spare capacity, so it felt available. Available is not the same as useful. Rule 2, crash in order of cost per day, saved. Cheapest first, always. Here are the options the contractors gave us on the original 175-day network. Activation and handover, Activity I, 15 days down to 12. Saves 3 days, costs $9,000. $3,000 per day. Splicing and testing, Activity H, 25 down to 18. 7 days, $35,000. $5,000 per day. Aerial construction, Activity F, 30 down to 22. 8 days, $48,000. $6,000 per day. Fiber pulling, Activity G, 20 down to 16. 4 days, $28,000. $7,000 per day. Cheapest first. Crash activation, 3 days, $9,000. We are at 172. Then splicing, all 7 days, $35,000. 165, having spent $44,000. Then aerial, $6,000 a day. And here is the moment that catches people out. We buy the first day, 164. Second, 63. Third, 62. Fourth, 61. Fifth, 160. And then it stops working. Why? Because the underground leg was 5 days behind the aerial leg, and we have just consumed all 5 days of its float. Both legs are now exactly 160 days. Both are critical. Buying a 6th day of aerial construction changes the end date by nothing at all. That is the most important practical lesson in schedule compression. Crashing consumes float elsewhere, and when it does, the critical path moves. You must recalculate after every single crash decision. If you had bought all 8 available days of aerial compression up front in one purchase order, you would have paid $48,000 and received 5 days. $18,000 gone for nothing. To go below 160, we now have to shorten both legs at once, which means attacking something after the merge. Fiber pulling, $7,000 a day, 4 days, $28,000. That works because it is on both paths. 156 days. Final tally on the crashing route, 19 days saved, $102,000 spent. Compare that with the logic route, which delivered 15 days for nothing. Same schedule problem, 2 answers, and one costs $100,000 more. That comparison is the reason this episode exists. Third technique? Fast tracking, running in parallel what you plan to run in sequence. Start splicing completed segments while fiber pulling continues elsewhere. Change the relationship from finish to start into start to start with a lag of, say, 8 days. That takes another 12 days off with no additional cost at all. But price the risk honestly. Fast-tracking does not cost money, it costs rework probability. If a segment you have already spliced needs repulling, you pay for that splice twice, in schedule as well as cash. So fast-track work that is stable and well understood. Never fast-track work still subject to design change. And finally, the thing that is not a technique. Cutting the number without cutting the work. Telling the boring crew that 45 days is now 32 days, with no change to scope, resources, sequence, or method, is not compression. It is a wish written in a project management tool, and everybody in the room knows it. The real damage is not that you will miss the date, which you will. The real damage is that your schedule stops being a management instrument the moment your team stops believing it. After that, people report against the fiction, problems surface later, and you lose the only early warning system you had. Now, everything so far assumed something that is never true. It assumed that whenever an activity was ready to start, the people and equipment to do it were available. The critical path is calculated from logic and duration. It does not know you only have one splice crew. So a schedule can be logically perfect and operationally impossible, and it will still print out and still look green. Two techniques address this, and they are constantly confused. Resource leveling. You adjust the schedule to fit the resources you have, and you accept that the end date may move. Leveling usually extends the project, and the critical path can change completely because you have introduced a new kind of constraint. Some tools call the result a resource critical path or a critical chain, the longest path through the network when you account for both logic and resource contention. That path is the one that actually governs delivery. Resource smoothing. You adjust the schedule only within available float, and the end date is protected. You are using slack to flatten the peaks and valleys of resource demand. Smoothing cannot extend the project, by definition, because it never touches an activity with zero float. It also cannot solve a genuine overallocation, only reduce lumpiness. So the choice is simple to state. Is your constraint the date or the resource? If the date is immovable, you smooth, and if smoothing is not enough, you must add resource or cut scope. If the resource is immovable, you level, and you accept a later date. What you cannot do is have both, and a great deal of project pain comes from senior people wanting both and a project manager who has not made the trade-off explicit. And notice that compression creates this problem. Both crashing and fast-tracking increase how much work happens at the same time. We crashed splicing by adding a second crew, then fast-tracked so splicing overlaps pulling, which needs the same technicians for terminations. Now our crews are double-booked across two activities we deliberately made simultaneous. So the correct sequence is compress, then level, then re-examine the critical path. If you compress and never check resources, you have not shortened the project. You have only shortened the drawing. One more thing. Watch for the resource you forgot to model. Everybody models crews and equipment. Almost nobody models the approver. The engineer who signs off every design package, the safety officer who authorizes every entry permit, the one architect who reviews every change. These people sit on the critical path of dozens of activities and appear in nobody's resource plan. When a project mysteriously runs slow with no identifiable late activity, look for a saturated approver. It is one of the most common invisible constraints in professional services and IT delivery, and it never shows up in a Gantt chart. Let's change industries completely, because this next one produces a failure mode you will not meet on a construction site. Corporate and technical training delivery, curriculum development, environment build, instructor certification, cohort rollout. The characteristic here is this: the dates are frequently the immovable object, and the work has to bend. On a fiber build, if construction takes longer, you finish later. Unpleasant, but the logic absorbs it. In training delivery, you often cannot do that because the cohort date is fixed by things entirely outside the project. 90 people have been released from operational duty for that specific week. A facility is booked. Certified instructors are contracted for those days. The system goes live the following Monday, so training must land before it, not after. You cannot slide a cohort 2 weeks right, because in 2 weeks those 90 people are back on shift and the system is live and they are using it untrained. So this is where negative float stops being a textbook curiosity and becomes your weekly reality. Here is a shape I see often. Curriculum development for a new module honestly needs 55 working days. Content design, technical review, pilot delivery, revision, sign-off. The functional specification is not frozen until a certain date, and the first cohort starts 45 working days after that, 55 days of work, 45 days of calendar. The schedule reports minus 10 days of float before anyone has done anything. What do people do with that? 3 things, and only one is legitimate. The first bad response is to delete the constraint so the report goes green. The negative float vanishes and nothing flags it. The second bad response is to compress the estimate by decree. 55 becomes 45 because it has to. Nothing changes in the work. What actually happens is the revision cycle after the pilot gets silently dropped, because it is last in the sequence and the date arrives. So the pilot reveals real problems, and those findings are never incorporated. 90 people get trained on material known to be flawed. That cost appears nowhere in your schedule, and it is the most expensive thing on the project because it lands months later as support tickets and rework. The legitimate response is to treat negative float as what it is. A decision request, escalated with options and numbers. 10 days must come from somewhere, and there are only 4 places. Reduce scope, fewer modules in cohort 1, add resource, a second instructional designer and a parallel review track at a stated cost. Change the logic, starting content design against the draft specification and accepting rework. Or move the date, which the sponsor has already called impossible, but which must still be listed so it is visibly declined rather than quietly assumed away. Present those 4 with costs and consequences. Your role at this moment is not to make the arithmetic work. It is to make sure the person with authority to choose is the person who chooses. One more feature of training work. Instructor certification must complete before the first cohort, and if it slips, it does not delay the schedule by its own duration. It collides with a fixed date. Model that certification finish as a hard milestone and watch its float weekly, because that is your real critical path, whatever the software colors in red. None of this is worth anything unless you can tell whether you are ahead or behind, which requires a baseline. A baseline is a frozen copy of your approved schedule. Saved, dated, never edited. Its only purpose is comparison. This is what we said, here is what happened. If you cannot measure variance, every status report you produce is opinion. 3 rules. 1. Baseline once the plan is approved, not before. A baseline taken from a draft is worse than no baseline because it gives false precision. 2. Never edit the baseline to match reality. It is the most common integrity failure in project controls. When a project is late, rebaselining makes the variance disappear and the report goes green. If you have rebaselined 3 times, you have no idea how late you are, and neither does anyone else. You have deleted your own history. 3. Rebaseline only on approved change, approved scope change, approved extension, a formally accepted replan, and keep the old baselines. Everyone. Now the 2 numbers. Schedule variance is earned value minus planned value. What the work you have actually completed was worth, minus what you planned to have completed by now. Negative means behind. Both figures are in currency, which confuses people because we are measuring a schedule in dollars. That is deliberate. It lets you compare across activities of different sizes and add them up. Schedule performance index is earned value divided by planned value. 1.0 is exactly on plan. Below 1, behind. Let's use our project. At day 100, our baseline said we should have completed work worth $4.2 million. The work actually finished, valued at its budgeted cost, is $3.6 million. Schedule variance is 3.6 minus 4.2, minus $600,000. Schedule Performance Index is 3.6 divided by 4.2, 0.857, so we are running at about 86% of planned progress, and here is the useful projection. If nothing changes, our 175-day project takes 175 divided by 0.857, roughly 204 days, a 29-day overrun calculated at day 100, while there is still time to do something about it. That is what these metrics are for, not reporting the past, seeing the end early. Now the critical warning. Schedule Performance Index is blind to the critical path. It is a value-weighted average across all your work, which means you can be completing large volumes of easy, non-critical work, post an index of 1.05, report yourself ahead of schedule, and be sitting on a stalled critical path that guarantees you will be late. The pattern goes like this. A program reports green for months because the high-volume, low-difficulty work is flowing. The permit, or the integration, or the regulatory approval on the critical path has not moved since month 2. Then the volume work runs out, the index falls off a cliff, and a project that was ahead of schedule is 4 months late and nobody can explain when it happened. It happened in month 2. So never report the Schedule Performance Index alone. Always pair it with critical path status and float trend. The index tells you how much work is getting done. The critical path tells you whether it is the work that matters. Now let me tell you why your 175-day schedule is almost certainly wrong, even though every calculation we did was correct. Everything we computed is deterministic. Each activity got one number. But no activity in the real world has one duration. Each has a range, and we already saw that. Our poll agreement was 40, 60, 110. So what does 175 days actually represent? It is the answer you get if every activity on the critical path delivers exactly its single-point estimate. The probability of that is essentially 0. And it is not a 50-50 estimate either. It is considerably worse for 2 reasons. Reason 1 is estimate skew. Durations are not symmetric. There is a floor on how fast work can go and effectively no ceiling on how slow. Remember the poll agreement. Most likely 60, expected 65. That 5-day gap is invisible in a deterministic schedule. It exists on nearly every activity, and it accumulates in one direction only. Reason 2 is merge bias. Look at fiber pulling. It needs both legs complete, so it starts when the later one arrives. Suppose each leg independently has an 80% chance of finishing on time. What is the chance pulling starts on time? Not 80%. 0.8 times 0.8. 64%. Every merge point in your network erodes probability, and it only ever erodes it. The merge takes the worst of its inputs, never the best. So a network with many parallel paths converging is systematically more likely to be late than any single path through it suggests, and no amount of careful single-point estimating reveals that because the effect is structural. Our telecom program with 40 parallel zones is this problem at industrial scale, which is what schedule risk analysis and specifically Monte Carlo simulation exists to solve. The mechanism is simple. Instead of one duration per activity, you give the tool a distribution, your 3-point estimates. Then the computer runs your network thousands of times. Each run, it draws a random duration for every activity, computes the critical path for that run, and records the finish date. After 10,000 runs, you do not have a date. You have a distribution of dates. That gives you 3 things a deterministic schedule cannot. First, confidence levels. Instead of 175 days, you get 50% confidence at 184 days, 80% at 192, 95% at 203. Now you can have an adult conversation about commitment. You commit externally at 80 or 90%, manage internally to the 50% number, and the difference between them is your schedule reserve, quantified rather than guessed. Second, and this is the output I value most, criticality index. Across all those runs, the tool records how often each activity landed on the critical path. An activity that is critical in 70% of simulations deserves permanent attention, even if today's calculation says it has 5 days of float. That is the rigorous version of the near-critical path discussion from earlier. Third, sensitivity. Which activity's variability actually drives your end date? Usually a small handful. That tells you where to spend money on better information, tighter contracts, or mitigation. One caution, because this technique can be used to launder a bad plan. Monte Carlo output depends entirely on the input ranges, and it looks extremely authoritative. 10,000 iterations and a smooth curve feel like science. If your 3-point estimates were guessed in a hurry by someone protecting themselves, you have produced a very precise picture of a fiction, and correlations matter. If bad ground slows boring, it probably slows trenching too, and a model treating those as independent understates your risk. Third sector, and it is the most extreme scheduling environment most project managers will ever encounter. Oil and gas, and specifically the turnaround, also called a shutdown. A turnaround is a planned total shutdown of a producing asset, so that inspection, maintenance, and replacement work can be done that is impossible while it is running. And it inverts almost every scheduling assumption we have been working with. The window is fixed and short, 21 days, say. And the cost of overrunning is not a penalty clause, it is deferred production, which on a significant asset runs into millions of dollars per day. So the cost of delay is orders of magnitude larger than the cost of the work itself. That single fact changes every trade-off in this episode. Consequence 1. Crashing becomes almost automatically justified. When a day is worth over $1 million in lost production, spending $100,000 to save a day is not a difficult call, so turnarounds are planned with resource levels that look absurd by normal standards. Multiple crews, 24-hour operation, people on standby specifically so they never become the constraint. Idle labor is cheap insurance against a critical path stoppage, completely inverted logic from a fiber build. Consequence 2. Almost everything is critical. Float has been squeezed out deliberately because the window is set by finding the longest chain and compressing it as far as money allows. So the near-critical discipline we discussed is not an enhancement. It is the entire method. Turnaround schedules are managed in hours, not days, and reviewed several times a day. Consequence 3. The dependencies are genuinely mandatory and safety critical. Consider a pressure vessel chain. Isolate, prove isolation, install blinds, purge and inert, test the atmosphere, issue the confined space entry permit, enter, inspect, repair, remove blinds, box up, leak test, recommission. Everyone is finished to start, and everyone is mandatory. You cannot overlap atmospheric testing with entry. Not because it is unwise, because people die. So fast-tracking, which was free money on our fiber project, is largely unavailable here. Your options reduce to crashing and sequencing. Consequence 4, the defining feature, discovery scope. You open the vessel and find corrosion nobody predicted. That is not a risk to avoid, it is a certainty to plan for. In telecom, if you scope a fiber route, you know what you are building. In a turnaround, a meaningful share of the work is unknown until you are inside, with the clock running at $1 million a day. So turnarounds are scheduled with explicit discovery allowances, pre-approved contingency work packages, and decision rules agreed in advance about what gets deferred to the next window. Because the window cannot move, the only variable is scope, so you decide the deferral rules before you are under pressure, not during. The plans that survive are the ones that decided in advance how they would fail. And consequence 5, the pre-window critical path. Long lead spares, specialist mobilization, scaffolding, crane availability, regulatory notifications. Many have lead times far longer than the turnaround itself, so the real critical path starts months before the shutdown, and it usually runs through procurement, not execution. A valve with a 9-month lead time ordered in month 8 is not an execution problem. It has already decided the outcome. Let's get practical about the software because everything we calculated by hand your tool does automatically, and the danger in that is you can be looking straight at a critical path that is wrong. Microsoft Project first. Your critical path is visible on the Gantt chart view, and the fastest way to see it is Format, then tick Critical Tasks, which turns critical bars red. Better, add the total slack and free slack columns so you are reading numbers rather than colors. Slack is Microsoft's word for float. They mean the same thing. 3 settings that catch people out. First, the big one. Microsoft Project by default shows you one critical path. If your project has several parallel paths at 0 float, or you are working with sub-projects, go into File, Options, Advanced, and enable Calculate Multiple Critical Paths. Until you do, you may be staring at one red chain while another equally critical chain sits there in blue. Second, in that same advanced area, there is a setting for how many days of slack counts as critical. It defaults to 0. Set it to 5 or 10, and your near-critical paths light up in red automatically. That single change is the cheapest schedule improvement available to you. Third, watch your constraints. The default is as soon as possible, which is what you want. But if somebody has typed a date into the start column rather than building logic, the tool quietly applies a start no earlier than constraint, and now that activity is pinned by a date instead of by logic. Your critical path is compromised and nothing warns you. Run the task inspector or filter for tasks with constraints, and check them. A schedule with dozens of hard-typed dates is not a network model, it is a spreadsheet with bars on it. Now, Primavera P6, the standard in oil and gas and in large construction and infrastructure, which handles this considerably better. The key difference, P6 lets you choose how it defines the critical path. In schedule options, you pick either total float less than or equal to a value you set, or longest path. These are not the same, and understanding the difference is a genuine mark of scheduling competence. Total float-based criticality flags anything at or below your threshold, but total float is calculated against constraints and calendars, so imposed dates and multiple calendars can produce activities showing 0 float that are not actually driving your finish date. Longest path ignores float entirely and traces the actual driving chain backwards from project completion, following the logic. That is the true critical path in the sense we defined at the start. On any large, constrained, multi-calendar schedule, longest path is what you want. P6 also gives you multiple float paths. You can calculate and rank several at once, so you see not only the driving chain, but the second, third, and fourth most critical chains in order. That is near critical path analysis built into the tool. And one more setting that materially changes your answer: retained logic versus progress. Override controls how the tool handles out-of-sequence progress, work that started before its predecessor finished. Retained logic preserves your network relationships and is the honest default. Progress override ignores the broken relationship and can produce a considerably more optimistic finish date. If a P6 schedule suddenly improves for no visible reason, check whether somebody switched to progress override. Whichever tool you use, the discipline is the same, and it is why we did all that arithmetic by hand. Every time you look at a critical path, ask 3 questions. Is this driven by logic or by a constraint somebody typed in? Have I checked for other paths at or near 0 float? And does this chain make physical sense as the thing governing my finish date? If you cannot answer those, the software is not helping you. It is just producing a color. Let me pull the whole hour together. 12 things, and if you keep nothing else, keep these. 1. A schedule is a model of how work flows, not a list of dates. Logic errors do not average out the way estimating errors do. Spend your effort on sequence. 2. Know the 4 dependency types and separate mandatory from discretionary. Mandatory is physics and contract. Discretionary is habit, and habit is where your free schedule savings live. 3. Lags are for real waiting. Never use one to hide contingency. If you need buffer, name it and put it where people can see it. 4. ask for 3-point estimates, not single numbers. The range is more valuable than the average because the width of the range tells you where your risk is. 5. The critical path is the longest chain of dependent activities, and it sets the shortest possible duration. Zero float means 1 day of slip equals 1 day of project delay. 6. Critical does not mean important. It is a structural property, and it moves as the project progresses. Recalculate it every update. 7. Total float protects the project. Free float protects the next activity. They are different numbers, and the gap between them is where cost claims come from. 8. Float belongs to the project, not to the team sitting on it. Track it as a trend. And negative float is not a tight schedule. It is an impossible one, escalated the day you see it. 9. Watch your near-critical paths. Set a float threshold in your tool and manage everything inside it like it was critical, because next month it probably will be. 10. Before you spend $1 on compression, interrogate your logic. On our project, breaking 2 discretionary dependencies bought 15 days for nothing, while crashing bought 19 days for $102,000. Try free first. 11. When you crash, go cheapest cost per day first, and recalculate after every decision, because crashing consumes float elsewhere and the critical path will move. Then check resources, because compression creates resource conflicts. 12. Never report a schedule performance index without the critical path status beside it. You can be 90% complete on volume and stalled on the one chain that determines your date, and underneath all 12, the same idea. Scheduling is not administration. It is the discipline of knowing which of your problems actually matter, which is why our 9-day delay was survivable and our 4-day delay was not. If you got value from this, like the video and subscribe, because it genuinely helps this channel reach other people doing this work. And I would like to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about the dependency that blindsided you, the one nobody put on the plan, that everybody discovered at the worst possible moment. I read them, and those stories are how the rest of us learn. If you want to work through the numbers yourself, take the 9 activities from this episode, do the forward and backward pass on paper, and confirm you get 175 days and a critical path through the pole agreement. Doing it by hand once is worth more than watching this 3 times. I'm Jane Asimuo, co-founder of Sanugo Services, an IT consulting company based in Canada. Thank you for spending this hour with me, and I will see you in the next one.